This is the WealthAbility Show with Tom Wheelwright. Way more money, way less taxes.
Welcome to the WealthAbility Show, where we're always discovering how to make way more money and pay way less taxes. Hi, this is your host, Tom Wheelwright, founder and CEO of WealthAbility. So, COVID has battered the economy. We all know that. That's pretty obvious. The economy is in dire straits as a result of what's gone on with the crisis. And the government has responded by first shutting down, then opening, then putting a lot of money in the economy. And so today, we're going to really discover what happens next. So what's the result of all of this government spending? How do we get through not just the crisis? Okay, it's one thing when your house is burning down, you do certain things, but once your house is burned down, what do you do? And then what happens for the next many years? And we have somebody I've been wanting to have on the show for a very long time now, somebody that I've admired for many, many years. The former budget director for Ronald Reagan. We were actually talking, we were in Washington at the same time. I was in a little lower position than Mr. Stockman was. But David, welcome to the show.
Happy to be with you, and good to talk about those times. We're in a totally different world today, I'll tell you that.
No, don't we? So if you would, for those who don't know you, David, would you give us just 30 seconds of your background?
Well, after I got out of graduate school, I went to Washington in 1970, worked as a staff assistant on Capitol Hill, kind of looked around and said, how did some of these bozos get elected? It can't be that hard. Some of them didn't seem all that smart. So as a young man, I was 30 years old, I announced I was running for Congress in my home district in Michigan. I happened to win, and I was elected to the House in 1976. I spent 4 years there. I was part of the Young Turks group at the time, Jack Kemp, and we were called Supply Siders, and we really wanted to change.
I remember that.
Yeah, we want to change the direction of policy, cut taxes dramatically, shrink government, let free enterprise thrive, and all those good things. And we got connected to the Reagan campaign in the fall of 1980. I don't know how exactly it happened. I got drafted to be his stand-in debate rehearsal opponent for his debates, first with John Anderson, the independent, who I'd worked for when I was a staff assistant, and then against Jimmy Carter. So I was Jimmy Carter for a whole week getting Ronald Reagan prepared. In any event, he won the debate. I think that's why he won the election. It was very close. And right after the election, he called me and wanted to know if I would be interested in joining his government. And I said, yeah, I'd like to be director of OMB, because I was very focused on the budget and realized, because I'd been in Washington long enough, that OMB is really the switchboard of the whole federal government. If you're, in charge of the switchboard, maybe you can make some things happen. Well, he said, I'm not sure exactly what that job is. He was governor of California. He was not that familiar with the federal government. But in any event, a few days later, he called back and said I had the job. So I became budget director, and then I became one of the architects, I guess, of the whole effort by the Reagan administration to change policy from the big government, great society, Jimmy Carter mess that we inherited. And we made a little progress, but not a lot, because it turned out that nobody wanted to give up all their goodies, and we couldn't cut spending. We cut taxes a lot. A huge deficit emerged. And, we've been fighting with that legacy ever since. Unfortunately, what happened was Greenspan got put in as chairman of the Fed when Volcker was forced out, and I was a great supporter and admirer of Volcker. I think he did the right thing. But Greenspan basically made it easy for them to keep running these large deficits. He monetized them. He put the Fed on the path after 1987 of continuously expanding its balance sheet, which then became massive in the crisis of 2008. And so, when you look at these numbers, you have to just kind of scratch your head. When Greenspan became chairman of the Fed in 1987, the balance sheet was $200 billion. Now remember, the thing opened in 2014. So that was 75 years it taken them to get to $200 billion. Today it's $7 trillion. Okay.
Right. So let me ask you. So let me ask you, David. So we've got the biggest deficit ever this year. I mean, in the first 10 months, trillions of dollars in deficit, never been this big. Do you think that the government, what was interesting to me was how fast the economy collapsed with the shutdown. I mean, how fast it collapsed. It was like, wow, you didn't realize just how tenuous our economy was until you saw that big hit. I mean, it hit my business, right? When we dropped 80% sales in 1 week. So did the government have an option other than infusing that $3 trillion into through the CARES Act?
Yes, it had an option, which is, and I'm glad we're raising this, because to talk about where we're going, we have to understand what has happened in the last 5 months, which is unprecedented, off the charts. They had the choice of not locking down the economy, of not panicking, of not going into a hysteria about the COVID, which was never justified. Now, I agree, for 5% of the population, it is a very serious illness, mainly the elderly, the very elderly, and people that have underlying life-threatening conditions. But we know by now, look at the data. Even if you talk about that number they keep running on the mainstream media, CNN, 150,000 deaths allegedly due to COVID, 80% are 65 and over half are 85 and over. If you look at the working age population from, let's say, 25 to 55, the mortality rate, and we don't like to talk about deaths, but we really need to get down to the nitty-gritty here, because we, by martial law, effectively, we shut down the economy to fight this thing. But if you take the population, 128 million, which is the core of the workforce, 25 to 55, the mortality rate is about 7 per 100,000. Now, the normal mortality rate for that population is 250 per 100,000 from all causes every year. So we're talking about a 2 or 3% share or impact of what goes on day in and day out. People get illnesses. That 8.6, by the way, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but that's half of the death rate from poisonings. That's less than half of the death rate from automobile accidents in that population. Now, the reason I'm dwelling on this is that's the workforce. That's the economy that got shut down. That's your 80% revenue that was lost. That's the whole sector of what I call hospitality and leisure, restaurants.
So you would not have shut down the economy?
Absolutely not. Trump made a horrible mistake by listening to Fauci and what I call the scarf lady, Dr. Birx. These people have been in the disease, business their whole career. Fauci went to the NIH in '68 when he graduated from Cornell, and he's been there ever since. And Dr. Birx has been in there since she got out of medical school. So between them, they got about 90 years on the government payroll, in 0 years out where you are in the real world trying to run a business. Now, how in the hell can you run a restaurant when they tell you only 1/3 of capacity is going to be allowed? How can you plan, for the future if they say, oh, we're having a slight increase in cases, so we're going to shut you down again, which is what's happened in Florida and Texas and elsewhere. We're in a real mess because this isn't a business cycle, the ordinary kind of business cycle that works its way through the economy in a year and a half. This was martial law overnight that was devastating, and now they're trying to buy our way out of it with this massive spending, which we should go into because it's off the charts. And
so let's talk about that. So I presume you prefer Sweden's way of dealing with it.
Sure, and it worked. Look at Sweden, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but they for a long time you can see all these stories in the New York Times and so forth. Sweden made a huge mistake, because their mortality rate was slightly higher than, let's say, Norway, and there's some reasons for that. Most of the deaths in Sweden were in care homes and long-term care homes anyway. It wasn't because they didn't shut down. But of course, they didn't shut down. Schools remained open, work remained open. The social congregation activities, as I call them, restaurants and so forth, remained open. But the point is, they have no new cases. They have maybe 1 or 2 deaths a day for the last 3 or 4 weeks. If you look at the charts, it's over. It's passed through the population. More or less, they have herd immunity. And if you look at the European economies now, coming out of the second quarter, the strongest economy in Europe is Sweden.
Wow.
And mainly what they lost was exports because the rest of Europe, which is their market, was shut down. But,
so let's talk about the deficits, David. Let's talk about the huge deficits. And what I'd like to know is, okay, let's say that, heaven forbid, things get shut down again when the flu combines with COVID in September and October, and now you've got some pretty major, it's an acceleration of what we've got now, right? So what happens then? And you keep running these deficits. I'd like to know what happens in the next 5 years.
I think we're in great trouble because the only reason we've gotten away with what we have so far, the only reason that we've gotten away with what we have so far is the Fed has monetized all the borrowing. Now, if we go to early March, the balance sheet of the Fed was about $4 trillion. By the end of June, when everything bailouts had passed, the $1,200 for everybody and the $600 a week of unemployment benefits and the so-called PPP program and all the rest of it, the balance sheet was $7 trillion. So they basically bought all the new paper that the Fed was pushing, or that the Treasury was pushing into the market during that 3-month period. Now, how long can you keep doing that? I mean, this is really banana republic stuff, both from a central banking point of view and from a fiscal point of view. And when I say central banking, I mean, when I say banana republic, I'm not really trying to, be excessive or use a exaggerated metaphor. We're going to end up this year, which of course the fiscal year ends in September, spending over $7 trillion, the federal budget, and taking in revenue of less than $3 trillion. So when you have a government borrowing far more than is taking in revenue to make ends meet, you got a banana republic. And it's not going to be easy to dig out of this, especially if the Democrats win the election, and they're going to make it worse.
So let's go to the other side of that argument, which would be the MMT people, right? Modern monetary theory.
Yeah.
And they think that actually you can have too little of a deficit, right? And they're saying, look, you got to keep pumping money into the economy, and deficits, while you can get too big, they, as long as you monitor them, they're not the end of the world. The way I look at it is, if you let's look at a bank, and a bank right now, they borrow at a low rate and lend at a higher rate. That's how they make their money. Sure. So they don't have any assets. I mean, banks don't really have assets. They have your assets, and then they lend you your assets, right? They lend you my assets is basically what happens. That's how a bank works. Why can't the government do that?
Well, it's very simple. If we take that period we've just been talking about, when they went from $3 trillion to $7 trillion, they bought $4 trillion basically of government notes and bonds and bills and some GSE, mortgage-backed securities. All of those represented real resources. At one time, they paid salaries, or they bought aircraft carriers, or they built houses. So on the one hand, those debt instruments represented the consumption of real resources, labor, capital, technology, and so forth. On the other hand, how did the Fed pay for that $4 trillion it bought? It simply created digital credit and put it in the bank accounts of the various dealers who sold them the bonds during that frenzied period of bond buying. Well, that's something for nothing. That's magic. On the one hand, you have digital air. On the other hand, you have $4 trillion of real resources. That's what's wrong with modern monetary theory. It's nuts. It's free lunch nonsense. You can't. I mean, a serious person can't even debate it. Let me tell you. So because how long can you, if you really believe in modern monetary theory, why have taxes? Let's not bother with taxes. Let's just borrow everything and have the Fed basically buy up all the debt with digital credits made out of thin air. And let me go further. Why work? Why do we need to work? We just have the Fed drop money out of the sky. They're getting close to that. When the $1,200 checks went out, that's like helicopter money.
Right.
It went to 160 million people. And where did the Treasury get the money to send out 160 million checks? It borrowed it, and the dealers sold the bonds the next day to the Fed. So I think if we're at the point in America, and I know you're trying to give this a fair hearing, but if we're at the point in America where moderate MMT is being seriously considered, we're in big trouble, because that's fantasy. That's free lunch nonsense.
Let's fast forward to January, February. We suppose we have now the Democrats in office, and let's suppose they have both the House, they have the Senate, and they have the presidency. Biden has proposed a $3 trillion tax increase that does not go to the deficit at all. It goes to social programs. The question is, what happens when you have a massive tax increase like that in an economy that's been in a downfall?
I think the day of reckoning arrives. I think we have a real disaster. We're just skating by right now because we have this massive air cushion of transfer payments and, enhanced unemployment insurance and $500 billion in the PPP program, and I could go on. Now, that's the only thing that's keeping the economy alive. It's very fragile. And if you come in with a massive tax increase, more spending, you're going to scare the hell out of Wall Street. You'll get a tremendous panic on Wall Street. They'll start selling everything in sight, stocks, bonds, anything. You'll really have a tremendous liquidation. And then how is the federal government going to finance all of that spending? I just think it would be a catastrophe. I see no way actually that it would happen. They might pose it. It'll get up onto Capitol Hill. It'll get in a huge food fight over, execution or, passing like we've never seen before.
So
unfortunately.
Let's just wrap up with this. What would you do? Let's say that you were in charge. You could do what you think is right for the economy. What would you do?
Well, the first thing I'd do is fire Dr. Fauci and say the lockdowns are over. We're going to let the economy reopen. We're going to take care of the vulnerable people, the open malls, go back to the bars, whatever they want to do. That's the first thing. The second thing, if I could do it, I would house clean at the Fed. These people at the Federal Reserve have just totally distorted the financial market. They've inflated asset prices beyond any reason. And I would say we're going to go back to sound money. We're going to go back to a real private enterprise system that's based on real price discovery in the financial markets. Third, I would tell Congress we've got to start living within our means. We're going to reform entitlements. We're going to cut the military budget by half, but we don't need to be policing the world. We can't afford to be policing the world. It doesn't work anyway. So I would cut $1 trillion or more out of spending from entitlements and from slashing the military budget. And I would try to get back to a path of rationality, of sound economics and sound money. It's a huge, tall order in a deep mess at the moment, but you can't just keep digging yourself in deeper. At some point, we've got to get back to sanity.
Okay, so we don't have a whole lot of control over that. So, because we're not there, we don't get to do that. So what do you suggest people do? One of the things I always ask our guests is, what practically should we be doing, given that we can't control that and that it's probably unlikely to change in the short run?
Okay, I think that's a great question. Yeah, I think it's a great question. One, we're going to go into real times. The 2020s are going to be a very bad decade. So people need to start conserving their assets, conserving their resources, reducing their spending, and get ready for the storm because it's coming. Second, get out of the Wall Street. The stock market, the bond market, all of the financial markets are unstable. They're dangerous. They're artificial. They've been propped up by the Fed. All of these prices are too high. Who would want to own a 10-year bond that's yielding 0.6% less than inflation? Who wants to own Apple when it's trading at 35 times earnings or double, its historic level? So get out of the financial markets. Third, remember when the rubber meets the road here, the only real money left is going to be gold. And I think gold is going to soar as a haven as people, flee the financial markets that have been so distorted and made so fragile and dangerous by the Fed. So those are the three things that I would recommend.
Awesome. So one of the best economic lessons I ever received, my wife and I were on an eco safari in Zimbabwe. And our guide, of course, Zimbabwe's been through this, right? So they've been through this rampant inflation and printing money and so forth. And we asked him, so what do you do? What have you been doing? He says, well, every time I get a paycheck, I immediately bought a cow or a sheep because I wanted it in a hard producing asset. I'm going, to me, that sounds like really good advice. Right? You get producing assets, something that's actually tangible instead of something that I loved your quote. I heard your quote once that you invest in things that Bernanke can't steal. So I love that. I think the whole idea of being sound and getting some financial education, I think, that's why I love what you're doing. I know you're out there, on the road, so to speak, on the road, but you're doing these interviews so that you can get people to understand what's going on. I just want to really thank you. If somebody wants more information about all of your great writings, what you're doing, where would they find you?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that. I talk about this stuff every day. I have a daily newsletter. Google it, you'll find it. It isn't free, I'll say that, but it's not that expensive. Okay. You could buy it by the month. It doesn't cost $1 a day. It doesn't cost much. But, every day I address these topics of a Biden administration, of a Trump administration, of the Fed, of the financial markets, of the fiscal situation, our foreign affairs policies, the world economy. All of these things you have to bring together in the big picture. And basically the title of my newsletter, Contra Corner, I think tells you where I'm coming from. Contrarian. I do not believe the establishment narrative. What they're telling you on CNBC or Fox Business or, the other cable networks is, what they want you to believe, but it's not where we're really heading as we go into the future.
Well, thank you, David. It's been absolutely an absolute pleasure, a delight meeting you and having this conversation. I think you've given some great insights and great advice. And just remember, everybody, when we get the true financial education, when we're really understanding what's going on, we do have some control over what we do, and we're always going to make way more money and pay way less taxes. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the WealthAbility Show with Tom Wheelwright. Way more money, way less taxes. To learn more, go to WealthAbility.com.